All right, we got to start this off the right way. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Elite Physique University. I'm John Gorman, your host. Got Dr. Pete Fitschen in the house joining us today. Pete, what's going on, man? How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, man. It's Jason is speaking at the PEC out in Denver this weekend, so I figure this is a good time for you and I to jump on and cover this topic. This is a really, really good topic. This is something that you spoke on, back in 2015. You were one of our very first speakers at the Physique Summit Conference, and you gave this talk, man. And you've given this, I don't know, numerous times all over the country, right?
Yeah. I've spoken on this a few times. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So normally how we do is with this show is we start off and we say, hey, what's something new that you've learned this week? What's something cool that's kind of happened with you? I've noticed here recently, you've just been crushing it on social with your clients' placings, man. So what's going on with you the last week or two?
Yeah, I mean, I've traveled to shows. Shows have picked up again for the fall, so I've traveled for shows 3 of the last 4 weekends, and yeah, I mean, I've had a client win a pro show. I've had 3 pro card wins. I mean, even over that time. I mean, I just yesterday I had another client win an overall in the pro card in men's physique in Minnesota. So it's been a good few weeks here. So I know it was slow early in the year, but it's good to see shows, kicking back up again and people having places to compete.
Yeah, it's you're a road warrior. I'm the same way. It seems like we're always on the road going to our client shows. How important do you feel that is to their placing? I know personally, I like to be there to control their stress, to make sure they're pumped up on time. How important is that for you as a coach?
Yeah, I mean, I try to get to what I can. You can't get to everyone's shows. You have someone compete in, Florida or wherever. I had a client compete in like Colorado this year, and in places like that, like you can't get everywhere. But I try to get to the shows I can get to, and a lot of times, if I'm going to have clients compete further away, I try to, like, if they're in the same part of the country, kind of looking at a show around the same time, try to get them to do the same show because if I can get 2, 3, 4 people doing the same show, I'll try to get there. Where if they all do different stuff and it's a long ways away, I might not. But yeah, I try to get to what I can. I mean, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like our models are pretty close and similar. I'm the same way. I jump in the car. I try and get numerous clients to all do the same show. It's very rare do I fly to a show. I mean, it just doesn't make economical sense.
No.
Someone pay for a prep and then you spend $500 on a ticket. It's just that part's hard. So I know I personally love going to shows. Real quick, new with me this week. I've had some pretty good placements with clients as well. You and I are both headed to Worlds next weekend in Liberty, the Kansas City area. And I think we've got some pro men's physique guys going to be matched up. So that'll kind of be fun from a competitive standpoint, a good natured competitive standpoint. It's too bad Cliff's not there. That'd be fun. I know there's been numerous times we've been at shows in Kansas City and it's me, you, and Cliff standing there watching our clients on stage. Yeah. But unfortunately, he won't have anybody in those classes. But yeah, man, I've been blessed with some really good client placings. I do want to let everyone know if they click on the show notes now or after the show, I am offering up my insulin sensitivity and cortisol reset class. That's on Zoom. That's on October 25th at 5 p.m. Central Time. Last time I held that class, it sold out. And I had to create 3 other classes. So this one will sell out. Just shoot me an email. It's in the show notes now. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is I brought on some new Fat Muscle Project coaches. Pete was one of the people that we were very, very fortunate to have. Pete, welcome to the team, man. That's you're a big addition for us. So, one of the things that you're going to be helping with is not only, your clients will get good supplements and just the basic stuff that you recommend, but formulation, like your background and your knowledge, especially in the research part of the industry. I'm looking forward to kind of picking your brain because, we can always be better. So there's stuff that we're going to have come out and I'm probably going to shoot to you and say, hey, give me your thoughts on this. So welcome to the team, man.
Yeah. Thanks.
We've got Billy Conklin also. We added to the team. He's been a client of mine for a long time. Very, very good athlete. So I'm excited to bring both of you on this week. And then I've got 2 other people that are in the works. And I'm excited to announce that coming up. So that's enough of me kind of blabbering on. Pete, I do want to give you a real quick intro, though, just from my side of this. You have your PhD in nutritional science. You're a full-time contest prep coach. You're a natural pro bodybuilder, very accomplished natural pro bodybuilder. You have your CSCS. You're a very highly sought-after speaker, and you're the author of Bodybuilding, the Complete Contest Prep Handbook. I've got that right here for those of you watching on YouTube. This is going to be linked in the show notes because to me, this book is actually going to play kind of a key role in some of our recommendations today. It's one of the best books on bodybuilding out there, especially up to date. And you co-authored that with Cliff Wilson. So did I leave anything else out, man? I didn't say anything about family or anything like that, but what else? Did I leave anything out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm married and have a dog. I mean, I don't have any kids or anything crazy like that, but
Well, let's give people an idea of your background. I mean, obviously, someone sees, Dr. Pete Fitschen, you have a PhD in nutritional science. Not just are you a contest prep coach and your athletes obviously are crushing it. What about the research side of the industry? How passionate are you about that? How's that kind of tie into you as a coach?
yeah, I mean, so I had the opportunity when I was in grad school to do like a case study on myself during my 2012 prep. And so we were taking measurements on me throughout prep, and we published that. I had some chances to co-author a few papers with like Eric Helms, Eric Trexler, Brandon Roberts, a few other guys over the years. They're also, bodybuilders with PhDs. I've done some of that, and then, yeah, just some of the speaking and things like that. But yeah, I think it's important. I think both sides are important to be a good coach. I think you need to know the science, because without that, you don't really have your kind of the basics down, and the experience application part's important as well. And so I think putting both of those together is really important. So yeah, the research side, I think, so it's half the equation, right? It's a very important part.
Are you currently involved in any research? Have you been talking to anybody about doing anything lately?
No, not at the moment. I had a paper come out earlier in 2020, but no, at the moment, no. I was just trying to get through the end of my own prep, and then that moved into yeah. Now I'm just traveling for client shows this fall. So my prep got extended a little this year because I was supposed to compete back in March, and my show was canceled at 6 days out. And so we pushed on, and I ended up competing in June and July. So
Yeah, I got to see you. Actually, you were here in my hometown at the Missouri State and
yeah,
NPC show. And obviously you brought the conditioning, you won the lightweight
yeah,
class, and got to stand up there in the overall. And that's always fun. That's always
yeah,
kind of fun to see. So I got some good pictures of you and sent them to Cliff and said, hey man, here's our boy here up here crushing it with the other guys, with the supers and the heavies. So
yeah.
it was pretty good. So speaking of prep, let's kind of get into this. The title of this is physiological changes during prep. And like I said, you gave this talk in 2015, but a lot's changed honestly since 2015. I kind of want to start this off and talk about the popularity of the sport, if you don't mind. Um, we see tons of new classes, new organizations. What do you feel like the popularity of the sport's been like since 2010?
Since 2010, I would say, it really, really exploded. Like I would say early on, like 2010 to maybe like 15, 16. I mean, I know when I won my pro card back in 2012, I mean, we had 3 full open classes. And I mean, several guys in that show have gone on to like do well as pros. And, it was big, and pro, not every show was a pro qualifier. Those that were usually really, really competitive. And yeah, natural bodybuilding really, really grew. And then I think it's still big, like there's so many sanctions and so many shows now. Like the number of competitors probably is as high or higher than ever, but there's just so many shows and so many sanctions. But it's kind of cool. This year, there's been some shows where they're as big or bigger than usual, because there just aren't as many shows. So there are probably less people competing this year just because of everything going on. But there's been some shows where they've been surprisingly bigger than I would have thought. I mean, I was at a show a couple of weeks ago when they had 9 in a women's physique open class. Like when's the last time you saw that? Like yeah.
I haven't.
Yeah.
Not
In a
in a
drug
while.
tested show. I mean, I haven't.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and from the NPC side of that, the way we kind of do the show is, I usually cover the natural bodybuilding side. Jason covers the NPC, IFBB. I'll kind of cover that side a little bit, because of the Missouri State and the shows like that.
that show
that I
was
send
huge.
people.
They said
Yeah,
it was big, twice as big as last year.
yeah. So we've got all these new categories, classics exploding, and like just everything is so popular right now that to me, I was just going to kind of echo what you said. I feel like total numbers are up, even though there's more shows or an organization spread out minus COVID.
Mhm.
that, man, maybe it's at an all-time high. We see more people dieting now than we ever had before. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so, and I think the fact that like social media, you see like everyone doing it too. So it may even see, I don't know, like it seems, may seem like it, but yeah, there's so many shows. Like I think if you add up the total numbers, I mean it's probably pretty high.
So let's, now that we know popularity's up, let's kind of echo that with the research. So prior to 2015, there wasn't a ton of research, and we're going to get into some of the old school stuff. And this comes direct from your presentation that I
Yeah.
swiped from you. We're going to talk about some of the cool stuff from the 80s and 90s that you went and found. But as far as research after 2015. Um, have you been involved in any? I know Dr. Bill Campbell has been involved in a ton. In my
Yeah.
opinion, he's kind of leading the way now at the University of South Florida.
Yeah.
He's been a guest on the show. If people want to go back and look, it's probably 6 or 7 episodes ago. He's really, really doing some good stuff. Lauren
Yeah.
Conlon's down there helping out as well. Just some really good stuff. Do you feel like there's been more research since 2015?
Oh yeah, there's been a ton. I mean, it started with, Chris Foss and I were doing our case studies at the same time and didn't realize it. Like we realized we were doing almost the same study at the same time. And we both still got them published because like they were the only two that were using like modern methods at the time, back when we published them and like in 2013, 2014-ish. And then since then, there's been a number of other case studies, even some small cohort studies where they even follow people, and many of them like post show and into the recovery period and things as well. So yeah, there's been quite a bit. And then, there's been several papers written on contest prep, off season, what we have at least for data and trained athletes as far as like ideal approaches and things. There's still a ton. Bill Campbell has had that refeeding study come out. There's been diet break research. So there's a ton of stuff that's come out, even some peaking stuff now, even since then. But I mean, there's still a ton more that needs to be done. There's still going to be individuality and application and experience involved as well. Still, there's still a long ways to go on the science side and the publishing everything side. But yeah, there's been a ton since like 2013, 2014. But before that, yeah, there wasn't much since like the 80s, 90s.
Yeah. And, I think this is an exciting time. I think if I could probably try and look forward to the next 5 or 10 years, I feel like as contest prep coaches, we're going to have the available research to us that's going to kind of really set things apart. A lot of this stuff we already kind of know, from seeing it in the trenches, and we think it's right. So I think some research will show that it is. And, maybe some will come out show, nah, that's probably not as optimal as you think. But it seems like research is always 5 to 10 years behind. That's the nature of the beast. But man, I'm pretty excited for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, there should be a lot of stuff. I mean, I look back, I just made a post on this recently about like, hey, I've been coaching like I graduated and I've been coaching full time. I mean, I've been coaching longer than that, but full time for 5 years, since I've been done. And, made a post recently about all the, the things that I've changed over the last 5 years in my approach. And so, I can only imagine, 5, 10 years down the road. I mean, I look back to like my first prep in 2004, 16 years ago, all the stuff that I do differently now. And so I can only imagine what like 20, 30 or, something like that, what I'll be doing compared to now, and I'll look back and be like, well, why was I doing that?
Yeah. And I love that too, because I have made multiple presentations over just the stupid shit I used to do back in the day. Cause dude, I was super bro. We didn't really know each other in 2010, 2011. Cliff and I did, cause we were butting heads and going out with our clients, but I was super bro over here. So I actually give a lot of presentations on, how I changed things over the years and started to apply research and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more than that. But let's go back in time. So to kind of set this episode up, I like to go back in time if we can. Let's talk about some interesting studies that you dug up. And we don't have to name the studies. I didn't grab those. You can if you remember them. But some stuff from the 80s and 90s where, dude, we talked about, you saw something where the average intake was as low as like 900 calories a day back in like
Yeah.
the
And like
80s
women.
and
Yeah.
90s. Yeah. That's crazy. Extremely low fat. I think on your presentation it said 9 grams of fat a day for a woman, 19 grams of fat
Yeah,
a
yeah,
day
there
for a
was fat,
guy.
like people were reporting fat intakes that low. Yeah. I mean, back then in the 80s, 90s, so that was when fat was bad, right? And so everyone did like incredibly low fat. And I mean, if you looked at like how like products that were marketed, right, everything was low fat, low fat, low fat, and and fat was the enemy. And so, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I've worked with clients who, may have like I've worked with older clients who may have competed back in like the 90s, and like, that's what all of them are surprised. Like, wow, you want me to have this much fat? And it's like, well, it's not that much. It's just more than none, like,
Yeah. 50 grams of fat a day for guys, not a lot,
no,
that's,
no,
to me, that's kind of almost a minimum for a while. So
yeah. Yeah. I mean, but it's more than like, 20 grams, I guess. So,
right. And I guess I should preface this by saying, would you agree with this? Most people back in the 80s and 90s, natural bodybuilding wasn't a huge sport back then. Would you say
no.
most people were normally assisted here that are looking at these
Yeah, yeah,
studies?
and they mentioned that in most of the studies, that like they were competing in untested competitions, or like they were, the people they were following were enhanced. They even mentioned it, some of them. So yeah, I think it's probably safe to say, especially because in a lot of these case studies, the people still placed pretty well. Like in these untested shows, even with some of the methods they were using. I mean, they placed generally pretty well, actually.
Yeah, and so I want our listeners to keep that in mind, because as we start to dig into this and talk about some of the muscle loss and some of that and the ratios to fat loss, like, remember, these are assisted folks and aren't going to lose as much muscle as a natural competitor. So these numbers that we're about to get into here actually aren't as bad as they probably could be. So another characteristic that you found was very high protein intake. I'm not surprised by that.
No.
Not at all. Complete elimination of food groups. That was something that, man, I think we still see that kind of carry over today, even from the
Yeah.
80s and 90s. And, we see a one set meal plan, these foods only, the 6 foods that work and stuff like that. Do you still have clients that come to you that had done that prior?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the two most common things competitors cut out historically during prep are fruit and dairy, because they're typically afraid of, the sugar in it or whatever. I don't know. But if you look at, like, if you go back and look at those studies, you look at the studies on, some of these competitors from the 80s and 90s, the two most common nutrient deficiencies that pop up in a lot of them are vitamin D and calcium, because these people are cutting, they're cutting dairy, I can't imagine, if you have vitamin and mineral deficiencies, that you're going to be losing, you're going to be maintaining muscle, performing the best you could, dropping body fat, recovering as good as you could if you have nutrient deficiencies.
Yeah. And it's cool to look back at this stuff from the 80s and 90s, because that kind of sets up what we see as things kind of evolve. And we still see a lot of this stuff being done today. What about this one, man? You noticed that there was high meal frequency, up to 10 times a day.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, they ate all the time. Well, that was the thing. People thought that, back then, that the more times you ate a day, the more it stroked your metabolic rate and things like that. And I mean, research since has shown, there isn't really any difference there. If you look at some of like the muscle protein synthesis data, you can probably make an argument that really low meal frequencies or really high meal frequencies probably aren't optimal. At this point, I could probably make an argument either direction, that you probably need, the ideal is probably somewhere in the middle, that like 4 to 6-ish kind of, based on some of the muscle protein synthesis data. And you start to see some of the refractory period, and the, if you're dosing protein too close together, you might not get the same spike from the next meal, and some of that. And so, so that 10 times a day may not have been, it may not have done what they thought it was doing.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, coming from a fat kid over here, somebody that didn't like being hungry when he dieted 10 years ago, I would have loved 10 meals a day, because you're constantly eating. So you don't have that bored hunger sent in. You're basically eating like every hour and a half, probably. So
It would have to be a really small amount, though, you would think.
Yeah, but at least you're eating every hour and a half, right? No, I definitely don't think that's ideal. Obviously, another thing that popped up was no carbs before bed. We still see that around to this day. I think that's kind of going away, but that was pretty common. And then finally, there was a lot of binge eating reporting, and I put in my show notes here. I was like, no shit, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're only eating certain foods and it's a set meal plan, and you're eating 900 calories a day, and you're not eating fat, and and usually the binging was, I think, after the show. They reported a lot of binging also. Like, I mean, generally the more eating behavior patterns in general are like a pendulum. And so between binging and restricting, and so the harder you swing and towards the restriction side, the harder it probably is going to swing back to the binge side. And so after a show, yeah, these people were gaining ridiculous amounts of weight and really fast. I think 20, 30 pounds in just a couple of weeks. And, just crazy amounts that, can't be good for, I mean, it's not optimal for progress, but I mean, that kind of gain that fast can't be good for overall health as well.
Yeah. And so I have some of those numbers here. I pulled them from the presentation. It said weight regain for a 25-year-old male on average 30 pounds in 3 weeks, 19 pounds for a female in 3 weeks. So if you're a listener and you haven't ever competed, that's, Pete, I've seen that quite a bit, especially with new folks, as we all kind of get more into this and we get a little more, I hate to say mature, but a little more seasoned. We're used to the deficit. We're used to expect what happens post show. I'm not seeing a lot as many problems with this now these days with my clients as I did back in the day. How's it looking from your end?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's as bad. I think, I think for a few reasons. I think one, because more people are talking about it. So, and I know I talk about it with clients, throughout prep, like the post show, we got to push food up. We got to gain some weight back. You're not going to stay stage lean. You know what I mean? And so they're kind of prepped for like what's to come. I think that has helped. I think, dieting flexibly obviously has helped so you can fit some things in during prep. You're not stuck to those 6 foods. I think that probably dieting slowly has helped because the deficit that you've had to, you're not having them in the crazy deficit. If you're dropping a 0.5% to 1% of body weight weekly, that might be a pound and a half a week. Like that's not a crazy deficit. Some of these previous preps, they were losing, back in the day, 3-4 pounds a week throughout prep. I mean, that's a huge deficit. Like you're probably really, really hungry and tired when you're trying to lose 3 and 4 pounds a week every week.
Yeah.
It's
I
think
definitely bad.
Yeah. And I think all of that. And then I also tend to push food up pretty quickly post show because I found that if people actually stay consistent, you can get their food really high, really fast. And a lot of the really, really fast gain you see post show is inconsistency. But I mean, if someone stays consistent, you can get them up quick. And normally I give them a pretty significant bump to start because you got to get them out of a deficit back to like whatever maintenance is. So we don't need to keep losing weight, and then we need to go beyond that. And so a lot of times after a show, I mean, I'll probably have clients check in with me every couple of days. And like, hey, we're not gaining weight yet, we need to add more food. And so, initially after the show. And so we can get their food really high, really fast, as long as they're consistent. I think when they realize that also it helps, what I mean? It helps the adherence because it's like, oh, I can get my food super high really fast here, I think just having the mentality that one meal isn't worth like, keeping your food lower, it just becomes a bad cycle because you have a meal where you binge and then you gain weight and then you try to keep your food lower because you're trying to control that gain. And then that just is restriction and that leads to more binging. And if you can just avoid all of that and just find some happy medium where you can get their food up to a place they can actually sustain and usually when you do that, they don't gain that much weight because they're eating less than they would if they were eating uncontrollably.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. I agree 100%.
Yeah. And so, long story short, I would agree. I think a lot of those things make it not as bad post show, although I have had a few situations in recent years where I've worked with someone that's come off one of those preps, like we mentioned, where they dieted down fast with a ton of cardio, very low food, very restrictive. And like, I didn't do their prep. Like they started working with me after their show and almost always like, it just ends so badly. Like it usually doesn't end well.
Yeah, for me, I don't have to take a lot of clients, but I have a hard time turning someone away in that situation because I know it's going to be ugly.
Yeah.
And from a coaching standpoint, and I'll get your take on this real quick, and then we'll move on to the next point. It's always the hardest client to work with because it doesn't matter how much we try and help them. They've got, like you said, that pendulum with all of that restriction and all the cardio and all the deficit. They're going to have that binge episode, and now they have it, and you're their coach, and now you have to clean that shit up, and it's really, really hard. So I try to not take a lot of those situations anymore because they just become hard as a coach. And those people need help. There's a
Yeah.
lot of good coaches out there. I just, man, I struggle with that one. I really
I
do.
I oftentimes in a situation like that too, if it's something that like continues and it isn't improving, that's where I generally recommend they work with some sort of counselor or psychologist. And it's always it's always hard to like approach someone with that, like, hey, I think you might need to work on some of these underlying issues, because oftentimes there's underlying issues to the binging and stuff too, because if someone's hungry and they overeat due to hunger, you a lot of times see them like kind of pick and eat at things, and like if they're dieting and prep and they're hungry, like they eat a little bit extra of this or that, and that slows down loss and progress and stuff. But like they don't just all out binge because they're hungry typically. Like if someone all out binges and his throat just throws in the towel, there's usually kind of an underlying psychological emotional component trigger. I'm not a psychologist, but I understand that it's not just hunger at that point. Like there is a psychological component, and that's where I think it's important to a lot of times I refer clients to counselors, psychologists in those situations, because oftentimes it can help a ton, because it helps them get at the underlying reason why they might be binging. And it part of it might be the restriction, but like if part of it, there might be something else going on also.
Yeah, and sometimes just the mention to someone in an email that, hey, you may need to see a professional about this is enough to
Yeah.
kind of get them to kind of tighten it up a little bit. I've noticed
Yeah.
as well.
Well,
So
and I mean, I've honestly, I think that working with a professional through tough situations is important. Like I've worked with a counselor during hard times in my life, like, and so, because it can be a hard thing to approach someone with, because they can, oftentimes, what I mean? They take it as an insult, right? Like, and it's not meant to be that, like, because counseling and therapy has like this negative stigma in this country. And I don't think it should. I mean, it's incredibly helpful, just from experience. I mean, and so I think when they realize, like, I've, what I mean? Not maybe I haven't, have nothing binging food related on my end, but like for other things. And so, the fact that I've gone through it, you know what I mean? Like they can relate, and
yeah.
a lot of times they'll like be more open to it. And it's amazing how much it can help.
No, I agree 100%. Let's get back to more of the stuff from the 80s and 90s, and we're going to talk about the better ways to do things. Something else that you found that, cardio of 10 plus hours, a steady state a week, a lot of that fasted, that was pretty common back in the day. We still see a lot of that to this day.
Yeah. 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 There are people who do tons of cardio. I mean, it's funny because I'll have clients ask me like, when are we going to add cardio? When are we going to add cardio? Like they feel like they should be doing all this cardio during prep. And I'm like, I and don't get me wrong, I have clients who are doing cardio. I mean, most people have to at some point during prep, but a lot of times I'll have people asking me, well, when are we going to add cardio? When are we going to add cardio? And it's like, well, we'll add cardio when we need to, but like you're losing without it and progressing here. Like, why are we going to throw it in now? Like, let's save it for when we need it.
Yeah. Why I like to, my clients don't do a ton of cardio. I try and keep them under 30 minutes a day. Some people I have to just take there.
Yeah.
Normally I notice it's someone that has had a lot of dieting history, or it's somebody that's probably not sticking to the plan the way that they should. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you hitting your macros? They're telling me a 7.5. Like, well, I'm gonna have to add cardio in to offset them kind of not sticking to it. Something else that you found too was, where'd I go here? They increased rep ranges and their strength would decrease during prep. That was super common.
Yeah. Well, my first prep in 2004, I mean, I was told like you get cut from high reps. So I did exclusively high reps, and, I'm not that it was all that strong when I started my first prep, but I'm sure I got weaker during it. Because if you're not training those lower rep ranges, if everything's like 20 plus reps and you're never you're never training heavy, like strength's going to probably go down. If you look at like some of Brad Schoenfeld's research on like really high rep training, you see similar hypertrophy between like sets of 8 to 10 and super high reps, as long as you take the super high reps to failure. But strength is generally better in the heavier group.
Yeah, I agree. And then the other thing too that we saw, a lot of sodium and water restriction during peak week back in the day. So I actually have an interesting, real quick story to tell. I had a client that competed this weekend. I'm not going to say her name. I don't know if she listened to the show or not, but it doesn't matter. I sent her peak week. She had plenty of water, all of her normal water, all the way up to Friday night. And then she had enough starting, 5 to 6 hours before stage time. She had enough with each meal and enough between meals, but not a ton. I think it was like 8 ounces with a meal and like 8 ounces in between. Total, she had about a half gallon by the time she hit the stage. Not a ton. I've had clients drink a hell of a lot more, but I kept sodium in, I kept all that stuff in. And when I sent her peak week, she came back with, hey, I really think I want to drink a gallon on Wednesday, a half gallon on Thursday, quarter gallon on Friday. And I'm like, my eyes glaze over because I recognize the old bro peak week because I used to do those back in the day. Diuretic, no salt the day of the show. And she said, there's a lot of bodybuilders in my gym telling me that I need to do this. So I said, hey, listen, so-and-so, Sally, I'll just call her Sally. I need you to not listen to them and you need to follow my peak week. And I explained to her why, and we don't have to get to a peak week episode. But I didn't hear from her at all. She wasn't sending me her picture. She wasn't sending me her weight. She wasn't checking in. She said she was too nervous, blah, blah, blah. She ended up winning all 3 of her classes that she was in. So here's what happened. I know she didn't do my peak week. She won her classes, but she would have won her classes anyway because the peak I had wouldn't have watered her over. But now this person thinks she won because she did all these drastic things and cut her water and did all this stuff when her physique was good enough to win. We still see a lot of that to this day, man. We still do. Or do you get much of that? Now, I haven't had anything like that happen except for, in the last 10 years, like maybe once or twice. But do you get a lot of people, like when you send their peak week, like, holy shit, you want me to drink all this or have salt?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite as common because I think most people realize, at least on the natural side, it's a lot more common. Like you go to a natural show, almost everyone's drinking water backstage. Like it's pretty common at this point. NPC shows, not necessarily. I would
Right.
say most people still don't drink water. Some of that is some of the drugs and things like that, but even some of the people there that are taking little to nothing still, are cutting water because it's just the thing that most people do for whatever reason. No, I mean, I had a show this year. I was pumping up backstage, and I was getting a really good pump, and I had a guy like complaining he couldn't get a pump, and he's like, man, I just can't get a pump. And I was like, well, what did you do for your peak or whatever? And he's like, well, I've had like a lot of carbs. I had like 500 grams of carbs yesterday. And I was like, well, that's good. And I was like, what about water, sodium? Oh, I everything was low salt, and I haven't drank any water since yesterday. And I was like, well, there's our problem. That's why you can't get a pump. You don't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I remember that feeling backstage in 2010, the last time I was on stage. I did everything to pump up. I was even drinking syrup back then. And, it's these days, like I'll have someone like an NPC show, like Matt Holcomb. He'll be back there drinking Gatorade and doing all this stuff, and he'll have 2 gallons of water by the time the night show's over. And he just looks fucking insane.
Yeah.
Veins everywhere, super full. And, there'll be other guys walking out on stage still chewing a candy bar in their mouth while they're walking on stage, not drinking water, thinking that that candy bar is going to help get them vascular and fill them out. Well, it's still sitting. It's not even going to be digested for another 30, 45 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just still, I mean, we still see a lot of that to this day, but I don't want to spend too much time. We've got a lot to cover here. Here's the other thing that you found. And I thought this was pretty interesting. I hadn't seen these numbers before, so this was cool. You found that 2 to 4 pounds of fat loss would happen for every pound of muscle lost, right? So someone would lose 2 to 4 pounds and they'd lose about a pound of muscle. Now, remember, you found that these were mostly assisted athletes, or they reported being in untested shows. That's a drastic number. Imagine if someone's natural. Yeah. Holy shit. What's that number look like, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a couple things to keep in mind with that number too, though. One is that was 1 pound of lean mass for every 2 to 4 pounds of fat. So some of that could be water, glycogen, organ weight, things like that. Cause organ weight goes down and things like that. So, like if you do a DEX on someone, during prep, like if their limbs aren't going down, but in lean mass, but like maybe you see some lean mass loss in their trunk, that could be something associated with just organ, weight or something like that. That isn't necessarily muscle. But some of it's that, the methods they were using for body fat were, calipers, maybe underwater weighing if you're lucky back in the 80s and 90s. So there was some error there. But yeah, I mean, they're still losing a good amount of lean mass. You know, they're probably losing muscle. I mean, much more, you know, because if you think about it, I mean, especially if you're a natural, I mean, think if a natural is losing 3 to 4 pounds a week, eating like 1,000 calories a day, doing 10 hours of cardio a week, and, you know, all that stuff, right? Like they, you know, exclusively high reps training and stuff like that. Like they would lose a ton of muscle, you know.
Yeah. And then what happens is the other thing you found, you kind of alluded to this earlier, many people placed high in their classes. So
Yeah.
now you see not only these people placing high, and maybe it's their first couple shows and their body can actually get by with going through something like that. Then they start to pass this on to everybody else is this is what you have to do for prep. Yeah. And now we have this thing that just kind of still doesn't go away. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you run over a fucking skunk and you just can't get that smell off. Like it's still around. But yeah, man, a lot of people were placing high. That's just, yeah.
But I mean, I think too, one thing to keep in mind is it's something that everybody did. You know what I mean? So like, I think you all just, you know, if everyone used poor methods, then the best bodybuilder that used poor methods is gonna win. I mean, I remember, I mean, even 6-8 years ago, I feel like if you went into a show and you had your clients drink water, it gave them like a significant advantage over everyone else because they looked better. Like, I mean, now everyone drinks water, you know what I mean? Like, so you don't have that anymore, but like, I remember that, you know, I remember doing, you know, with clients like 2012, 2014, you know, you'd go into a show and they were drinking water and half their class or more weren't. And they would have a huge advantage simply for that because they were using a better method.
Yeah, no, I remember when I switched, and I would keep bringing Cliff up on the show, but it was 2011 and my clients and his were really battling it out. And my clients weren't drinking water the day of the show. They'd have a little, but I was loading them pretty hard and still sticking to the old school methods. And, you know, that stuff does work. It's just not going to work the best. Right. So his clients were showing up drinking water and they were just looking like freaks, like natural guys looking like they're on drugs. Right. And I thought, okay, what's going on here? And I'm not the type of guy that's married to the way that I do things. If I get my ass kicked some way or something's better, I'm like, all right, I need to go rethink this. So I slowly start adding water in. I remember that was 2011, probably one of the most important switches that I made. I do want to get into now how we can start to correct some of this stuff. So like you said, you at age 26, you went through your own prep as a case study and you measured all these different things on yourself. So not only can we talk a little bit about that, but we can talk about what you see as a coach now too, because you've been doing this for half a decade full time. How crucial was it for you to go through that case study yourself to kind of learn some of these things to influence your coaching style?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was good to measure all that stuff. Honestly, it almost convinced me to have clients measure less stuff because I felt like I was way more in my head than I was in a normal prep.
Yeah.
So like, for example, one thing we did was do a DEXA every single month. And so you know, DEXA still has like 3 to 5% error or something like that, an individual measurement. And your body fat from month to month isn't changing more than 1% or 2%, even, you know, because you're dieting slowly and everything. Because Lane did my prep back then. I wasn't doing anything crazy.
Right.
And so, you know, so I was dieting and there was a month in there, like 3-4 months in, I was starting to get leaner and I felt like things were really starting to come together. Like you could start to see it. And I thought it was a good month. Like my strength hadn't started really dropping yet. I was still feeling pretty good. Visually, I was seeing changes. The scale was down like, you know, 5 pounds or whatever that month. And then I did the DEXA and the DEXA said I was only down like, you know, like 0.3 or 0.4% body fat that month. And it just messed with my head so much because it was just the error of the measurement, right? Everything else that means something, like my strength and what I look like and what the scale is doing, and you know what I mean, and how I'm feeling and all of that, suggested everything was going in the right direction. It was a really good month, and then I got that number, and it just messed with my head. And man, I was just like dreading, you know what I mean, getting them the rest of the study. And I noticed with clients too, when you'd have them, you know, measure, like do like body fat measurements, like they put way too much stock in them. And there's way too much error in them for them to be putting that kind of stock in the measurement. And so, you know, like I've had situations where, you know, I had a client who did like a BIA, used like, you know, bioelectrical impedance, which has even more error. And this was a few years ago, and they were freaking out because their body fat went up, from like 1 month to the next, because those measurements have like 7 to 9% air. And so their body fat number went up. And I was like, okay, hold on. So since your last measure, we go through all the variables, right? And it was like, okay, so since the last time you had your test done, it's been like 6 weeks, you're down like 8 pounds body weight. Is your strength down? Well, no. They're like, no, not really. Okay. I said, okay, so you've lost 8 pounds of body weight. You're not getting weaker. And visually, if you put your pictures side by side, you look leaner. So why, you know what I mean? Like, why are we freaking out that a number said it's, so I actually encourage clients to not measure body fat percentage and not worry about some of that as a result of my case study and then seeing the same thing in clients.
I can agree with that 100%. So, some of these things we're going to talk about a little bit more optimal ways to approach this. Some of these things I've noticed, I'll get a client that comes to me and they'll prep a certain way and they'll have a certain stage weight. Like maybe it's a guy steps on stage at 170 pounds, for example. And then I'll take him for a couple years, do his off season, right? But then the changes in the way that he prepped versus a 12-week super hard prep, really harsh, high cardio, low calories. And then I take him a kind of a slower prep, maybe 20 to 25 weeks, pound a week loss, which I'll get your take on that in a minute. But I've noticed that his stage weight goes up. And over the years, I noticed, I don't think it was because he had a great 2-year off season. I think natural guys can put some muscle on, but if you've been training for a while, to me, normally when I see stage weight go up, it's the difference in the prep style. Yeah. So it's them losing less muscle over time and them losing a little bit slower. Have you seen that as well from your end when you take somebody on like that?
Yeah. Or one thing you see a lot of times, I feel like in a natural also, is they might step on stage at the same weight. Like maybe you have someone and they compete, that 175-pound guy comes back on stage and maybe he's still only like 170 pounds 2 years later, but maybe that 170 looks better, and so, I always think of like Brian Whitaker is a great example of this. Like when he first started winning worlds, if I'm not mistaken, he was like 162, 164. And I think over the years, when he kept winning his class at worlds, I think he was still only like 167 or something like that. He said when he won I could be wrong on these numbers, but if I'm remembering right, like he was only like 167 when he won the overall, like his 2 world titles. And he only gained like 3 to 5 pounds over all these years. He kept winning his class, but he's looked better and better and better and better. And his methods got better and better, that he was using. He started working with guys like Lane and like Mike Zordos, and the methodologies got better and better and better. And, he just kept looking better even at the same weight. And I think that's a really, great example too, that the stage weight might not even have to go up for someone to look better at it, even especially those elite athletes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I noticed one thing too. Let's talk about training. We see a lot of people that used to train 4 times a week, maybe body parts once a week. We've talked a little bit about this on the show and in some training episodes, but if someone's dieting down, what's your take on training body parts once a week during a prep, once a week, 4 times a week, like chest, how it is, the old school bro split, which has built a lot of muscle on people. There's nothing wrong with the split, but when you're dieting down, what's your thoughts on holding on to muscle training 5 to 6 days a week versus just training 4?
Yeah. I think it depends on the person and the situation. Cause I think it's important to look at, are you actually recovering? I just looking back at my prep, when my prep got extended and I got real, there was a lot of time spent really lean and my recovery wasn't that great. And I kept forcing 6 days a week, hitting everything twice a week. And in hindsight, that was a terrible idea. Like I wasn't recovering. Like there were weeks I'd go in to hit something the second time and I'm like, why am I here? Other than the fact that I feel like I need to expend some more calories, like I wasn't getting quality out of it. I've actually spun it back this off season so far to where I'm training. I am doing the one body part once a week, just 4 workouts a week. First, because I just couldn't recover from anything coming out of my shows. Like I just wasn't recovering. And now like my strength's still going up. Like I'm actually making progress. So I'm like, let's see how far this goes. And don't get me wrong. Like I'm going to have to go back to training body parts more frequently and add more days and more frequency and more stuff in. But I think it all has its place. And I think you also need to pay attention to, like I said, how is someone recovering? How are they progressing? And what are they actually doing in the gym? If someone's training really, really intense, if there's a lot of two failure, super intense, heavy train, someone who's super strong, that might take some more recovery. Or if they're training with a lot of volume, that might take some more recovery. Or, if they're dieting, their recovery might not be as high. Or, and I think a lot of times when I have clients come to me and they'll be on the fence, do they want me to program their training or not? A lot of times what I ask them is, well, are you, progressing with what you're doing, and are you enjoying it? And if they're like, yeah, I'm getting stronger, whatever, keep going with it, like until you stop, stop progressing. Like, but if someone is, if they're like, no, I'm not seeing much progress. Okay, let's take a look at what you're doing. How can we make this better? And so, yeah, I think there's, yeah, so I don't know. I guess I don't have a definitive answer on that one, because I think it depends on the situation. Because I can tell you, just after my shows, I just wasn't recovering. Like, I was trying to force 6 days a week at the end of prep, and in hindsight, it was a terrible idea. Like, I probably would have been better off training 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, I've always had it kind of stuck in my head. If somebody can train their body parts twice a week while they're dieting down, to spike muscle protein synthesis twice a week to help them hold on to that muscle as long as they're recovering. I've always kind of went with that. But I'm also
that's usually my go-to is I think a default is usually twice a week. Is probably a good starting point for most people.
Yeah. And I almost wonder, if someone gets all the way lean, stage condition, you're starting to reverse into shows, maybe pulling back to 4 days a week to drop cortisol and let your body actually recover. It's not like you're going to lose muscle. You're increasing food. I almost wonder if that just wouldn't be better for joints and everything else.
Well, and I think one thing to look at too is how much cardio is that person doing? Like, if you're doing, early on in prep, okay, so you're eating a good amount of food. You're not really doing much cardio. You're still at a body fat percentage that's sustainable where you feel good. You can do 6 days a week and recover. You know what I mean? If you're rolling with 6 days a week, you're recovering, you're feeling good. But as that cardio amount goes up, as food goes down, as you get leaner, you may have to back off a little bit, you know what I mean, on something, whether that be reducing the frequency, maybe pulling volume back a little bit. I hate to pull intensity back. That's one thing I would try to keep up if at all possible. Because that's honestly, I think that's probably one of the biggest things for holding muscle during prep is continuing to train intense, and training hard. But something you may have to get pulled back if you're finding you're not recovering. But like I said, a lot of times the first thing I go back to is the person actually getting stronger? Or like during prep, are they at least maintaining strength as we're going, if they're a natural prepping for a show, maybe they won't be by the end, but like, those are things that's kind of where I would start, and then if the answer is no, obviously that's where I would look to probably be changing something.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and end this. This is going to be part 1. You guys stay tuned next week for part 2. We're going to get back into this. We've got a lot to cover still. Cardio, rate of loss, all the different things that go down and up, testosterone, insulin, cortisol, thyroid hormone, ghrelin. We haven't talked a lot about ghrelin on the show. And then we're going to talk about advice for people as they start their next prep. So, Pete, thanks for being on. We're going to get off here, but actually in the real world, you and I are about to jump back on and start part 2. So you guys check out the show notes for all of Pete's information, his social media, his website, the link to his book, my email for the insulin sensitivity class that's getting ready to happen on 10/25. So from myself and Pete, we'll be back here in about a week. Later, guys.